Let's look at using a rotoscope technique inside of Photoshop. Rotoscoping is a technique that goes right back to the roots of animation, right back to the start of filmmaking, and essentially rotoscoping is the process of tracing film or video stills in sequence so that we can utilize that kind of natural live action movement that film and video is able to capture, and we can bring that into our animated artwork. So let's have a look at how we could make something like this kind of animated pattern that I just had up on screen a second ago. We're going to use Photoshop, so let's open up Photoshop, and what I'm going to do is I've got a sourced piece of video that I've found at Pixels, and I'm going to use that as my starting point. And that's a video file. Downloaded it to my desktop, and it's an MP4 file. And funnily enough, Photoshop will open an MP4 file as well as a lot of other video files. So I'm just navigating to my desktop, and this is the video here of a dancer in the street, in a street. Open that up. It might take a little bit longer than usual. You can see here's my video, and we can start working with that. So, I mean, essentially, we can navigate around this video the same way we would with any kind of still image. It's just that what we've got here is a sequence, so a series of still images kind of stacked together to create moving image, and we can look at that or access that sequence by navigating to the timeline in Photoshop. And you can see that I've already got the timeline open in my app here. The timeline exists, presents itself like this. We've got some playback controls, and we've got a video clip here. I might just zoom in a little bit on that video clip by dragging this little toggle here, and it allows us to see kind of more of our video clip. We can see here that we've got seconds going into time, 1, 2, 3, 4, up to about an 8 or 9 second clip. And if I use the playback controls, I can play that through. You can see our dancer dancing on the street there, and that'll loop through continuously. So we can see over in our layers palette that we've got this video group here, and it's kind of like a folder with the video file in there. You can see the video file icon there, and at the same time we've got a corresponding kind of layer in our timeline, and if I make more layers in the layers palette, they'll appear in the timeline as well. We'll focus on the timeline for this tutorial. Let's have a look at the timeline options. We've got a few things in there that we can play with. You can see that we're looping our playback. And the other thing that I want to just check right now is the set timeline frame rate. So let's have a look at that. Now you can see that video file that I have got from Pixels is shot probably using a phone, set to 25 frames per second. So that means 25 single frames flash past your eyes every second. Now that's quite labor intensive for the computer, and it's also going to be really quite labor intensive for us when we start tracing all of those frames. So I'm really going to pull down, particularly just for this demonstration, you might want to have few more frames per second, but I'm going to pull this right down to 8 frames a second. So I only have to trace 8 frames for every second of motion that I want to capture. So I'll drop that right down. Now you can see that that's kind of altered our timeline a little bit. I'm going to zoom in again. So we're still at the same overall length, but the computer's going to show less frames per second, and it might be a little jumpy compared to the previous playback. Let's have a look at it. Yeah, so it's kind of a bit stilted. So when you're doing your piece, you might want to up the frame rate to maybe 12 or 15, depending on how much kind of work you want to do, because we are going to be tracing these manually by hand. So I'll just stop that and we'll prepare our kind of workspace to do a bit of tracing. I'd like to crop this down a little bit. So I want to crop a few things. I want to crop the actual canvas size, and I want to crop the clip itself and make kind of a trim so that I don't have that many frames to trace. So firstly, to crop the canvas, I'm going to use the crop tool. So I'll grab the crop tool. I'm using the 1:1 ratio preset, and I'm going to click OK. So that's cropped our video down to a square, which is good. And now I want to just shorten the length of our clip so that I don't have so many frames to trace. And I'll just run through. I might start. Well, we might just cut it down to about 3.5 seconds, and then that'll just make the amount of tracing manageable for the tutorial. But of course, you can make your own your rotoscope animation as long as you want. It's just that the longer it is, the more frames you're going to have to trace. So I've dragged in that the workspace indicator, I suppose, and I'm also going to drag that clip into match it. You can drag your clip from either side if you want to crop the start or the end. So now I've got just a bit of a shorter loop to work with. Kind of ends a bit abruptly, but that'll do for our tutorial. Now what I want to do is create a couple of extra layers for us to work with. So I'm going to go over to our layers palette, and I'm going to create, firstly, select layer and go video layers, new video layer, new blank video layer. Alright, so we've got a new blank video layer over here. Not 100% sure why it's kind of made it a little bit bigger, but we'll just crop that down so that it matches our video that we're working with. And we'll use that layer 2 to actually do our rotoscope tracing work in. So I'm going to rename it and call it Trace or Rotoscope. So I can use, kind of any graphic making tools that I want to draw in this layer now, and I can do it frame by frame. So I can just sort of move through the timeline there and trace each of the frames and create the artwork, that I want to suit my aesthetic. I might, just so that we can see things a little bit easier, drop the opacity of our current video or of our group that we're tracing, just drop that down a bit. So I might drop it down to around about somewhere between 50 and 75. And behind that, I'll put a solid color that's white. And I'll drop that down behind our video, just so it's a bit easier to see. Strangely, it's created that at 5 seconds long by default as well, so we'll just tidy that up to match our clip. So now we're ready to start drawing. We've got to make sure that we're drawing in the right layer, and that's going to be our trace rotoscope layer, which is right at the top there. Now we can navigate backwards and forwards through time just by dragging the timeline indicator like so. We can also click on the playback controls, and we can use the arrows on the keyboard. So I'm using the right arrow on my keyboard and the left arrow on the keyboard. So we're going to start drawing in frame 0 and then kind of see where that takes us. So I'm going to grab a brush over here and kind of just maybe bring the size of that down a little bit using the square brackets on the keyboard. You can decide what kind of brush kind of characteristics you want to utilize with your rotoscope work. I think this brush that I'm using is something I've downloaded from the Adobe website and installed on my machine. But you know, use anything that you feel like. And I'm going to be just kind of tracing the outline of this video, but you could do anything. You could create fills, use different colors, and so on. All right, so let me get started. And I'm going to be working very quickly and roughly. This is just to give you a kind of a sense of the process. And of course, I'll want to pick a color to use, and I'm going to just use black. I'm just using the mouse here, so it's a little bit of a challenge to get a good drawing, but kind of not impossible. And I think I can be a little bit rough. This is part of the characteristic of my animation, or what I'm going for, kind of a sketched look. So there's my first drawing. It's occurred in this layer here, and if I just remove the video in the background, I've just got my brush marks there, which is good, and then the video that is my guide. Now I'm going to want to move forward in time, 1 frame, and continue that drawing process. So I can use the keyboard shortcuts, arrows on the keyboard, to move ahead in time, or I could move ahead in time like that. And now you can see my drawing has disappeared because I'm in another frame, but you can see the next frame of the video under there, and I could keep drawing that. Sometimes it's helpful to see the previous frame that you were drawing in, and you can use a tool in the timeline called onion skinning. And here's your onion skin settings, and let's just turn that on. So with the onion skin settings, we can overlay frames ahead of us, frames before the current frame or frames after the current frame. That's often very useful. I'm just going to have 1 frame before us, and just to be able to see what I'm drawing, and then the change that's taking place. You can change the opacity of those things if you like. So I've turned onion skinning on now, and I can turn it off by going back to the onion skin settings. In our settings pull down, if required, I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and actually I might just turn the onion skinning off. It's not really helping me at the moment. Sorry, we'll turn the onion skinning off by unchecking enable onion skins. Alright, now I can make sure that I'm in the right layer and I'm on the right frame, and I can draw another, my next frame. So I'm just picking a couple of kind of details out of the drawing. want to replicate. And if I had like a Wacom tablet or something similar, of course this would be a lot easier, and kind of probably I could get more interesting results as well. So there's my next frame. And if I move ahead again, I can just keep working through this process, and I'm just sort of remembering what details I'm picking up on. So just capturing the kind of cap and the t-shirt, the arms, not worrying about kind of fingers. Just kind of getting the general gesture of the dancer. Excellent. And moving ahead again, another frame. I'll just do another couple of frames just so you got the idea. Trying to work as quickly as I can. Of course, you could be a lot more detailed than what I'm doing in this demonstration. So let's just have a look at those frames that we've got there. If I use my keyboard shortcuts, I can move forward and backward and forward, and you can see that even though my drawing is pretty rough, I am still picking up the kind of general characteristics of the movement and that kind of more fluid movement that video allows us, or that video you can capture with your video camera. All right, maybe just a couple more frames. Turn my guide back on, make sure that I'm in the trace layer, and don't know why I started with the t-shirt first this time. Probably helps to be systematic when you're doing this, to start with the same details each time, and just so you don't kind of get lost. All of our normal navigation shortcuts obviously continue to work because we're in Photoshop, and I know you're generally familiar with Photoshop, so we can use the spacebar to navigate around, and we can also use the command plus and minus to zoom in and out. All right, so I think I might just stop there in terms of drawing. I think that you'll probably get the idea. You can see now adding just even a few more frames there, just to the point where it's about to jump. They're about to jump. Now I'll quickly just pause here and open up a video that a file that I prepared a bit earlier. Okay, so this is the project that I worked on a little bit earlier, and I got through all of the frames kind of quite close to 4 seconds, and it's kind of a bit more of a useful sequence. If I scroll through, you can see my character spinning around on the ground, and if I scroll backwards and forwards, I've got that that video, captured that video movement, but with a kind of a handmade technique. So what we'll need to do now is export this out, something that we can use. We can export all sorts of files, different video files, QuickTimes, MP4s, you might want to export out an animated GIF to publish on a website or something. I'm going to export out QuickTime so that I can import this into After Effects, and I could maybe composite this with some other media and some other animation that I've created using other techniques. To do that, we will go to our timeline menu, and there's a little option down here called Render Video. So what we're doing is, to render that video, we're going to get Photoshop to kind of crunch all the pixels, all those individual frames, 8 frames a second, and compile that into one single video file. So I'm going to output that to the desktop, and I don't know if I've used that file name before. I'll call it Rotoscope Demo. Selecting folder to the desktop, and I'm going to use the Adobe Media Encoder. The format that I'm going to use is I'm going to go with QuickTime. Animation quality is going to be high. Document size, actually, maybe I should go with 264. I'm just going to cancel that out. Go again. H.264. We'll do an MP4, because then that'll allow us to use the same size that we're currently working in, which is 1080 by 1080. Quickly just go back over that to the desktop. H.264. I think that's all we need to do, and I'll click render. It looks like it's already done that, so we'll just hide Photoshop. We can see that our video file has exported. I've opened that in QuickTime, and at 8 frames a second it is a little bit jaggy, but you certainly get the idea. And even at 8 frames a second, you still see that kind of nice fluid movement. So now this is something that we could compile further in After Effects. I'll just quickly open up After Effects, and we'll import that, and we can use it as part of a compositing project. So here I am in After Effects. I have just exported my rotoscope file. Now that file is something that you can publish as is. I mean, you might finish off your animation in Photoshop with a few, with a bit more detail than I have put in, but that might be the end of your project, and you could kind of publish that MP4 if you liked, uploaded it to some social media or video site. But you could take it further in After Effects by importing it into your project bin. So we'll go File, Import that file. And once I've got my video file inside the project bin, I could make a composition of it. So I could drag that onto the new composition icon down here, and then open up that icon, and I could composite this with some other material. And I think the only thing that I'm going to do is kind of make a grid of these characters dancing. So I'm going to scale it down, S on the keyboard, scale down my, and I might make it, if I make it 50%, that should allow me to put 3 next to each, 4 in the composition. I'll duplicate that one, change the position, and Command D, if I duplicate those two, I can speed things up a little bit. I might put in the background here a solid color. So I'll go to Layer and New Solid, And I'm going to put a white solid in the background. Click OK, just in case there's any sort of gaps that I forgot. And now we've got a nice cool grid of those characters, and I could export that out from Media Encoder by going to Composition, Add to Adobe Media Encoder. Good luck with your rotoscope animations.